Hi guys, welcome back to my podcast. So today is the sixth episode of my wildlife podcast, and I thought why not make a continuation of my previous episode where I actually told you guys about the most common birds that you can see from your window or balcony if you live in Mumbai. And today's episode is going to be a continuation of that since I'm going to be telling you guys 9 more bird species that you can see from your window if you're patient and if you're lucky. And if you just sit at your window during the early morning hours or during the early evening hours and just observe the canopy of the trees that you can see, or just observe the sky and notice any bird that's flying across the sky, maybe if you're lucky, you can get to see a lot of different bird species. And I'm going to be talking about the first bird species that is quite common in Mumbai and that I have seen a lot of times from my window, which is the spotted owlet. Now, spotted owlets are one of the most fascinating birds ever. They're really tiny species of owlet, and they're really special owlets since, unlike most owl species which are nocturnal, these are actually diurnal as well as nocturnal, and they actually make their nests in the hollows of trees. But since they're so well adapted to living in urban areas like cities and other urban areas, they actually can sometimes nest on top of old abandoned buildings and rooftops as well. And what's truly fascinating is that they have a generalist diet. They can eat anything from cockroaches, beetles, ants, and worms to even tiny snakes like the Brahmini worm snake, and even rats, mice, and reptiles like lizards. And I find this to be truly fascinating. And I have also read an article about how some spotted owlets have also been known to eat scorpions like the Indian red scorpion, which is truly fascinating. And since they eat such hard chitinous insects with a lot of hard exoskeletons, um, they actually don't defecate these hard exoskeletons out, and what they do is they will actually regurgitate these exoskeletons in the form of compact pellets. And in cities, a lot of times spotted owlets can be seen perched on top of street lights, and they actually do this because lights naturally attract a lot of swarms of insects, which the spotted owlets, since they have a generalist diet and they also eat insects, feed upon these hundreds of insects. And they're truly special creatures. And also, a lot of times I have seen pairs of spotted owlets that are allopreening, which means that they will mutually actually clean each other's feathers since they like staying clean. And spotted owlets, since they're diurnal as well as crepuscular, a lot of times they will be perched on top of branches during the day. And since they're perched on top of branches during the day, a lot of other birds that are highly territorial, like crows, jungle crows too, and mynas especially, will actually mob these owlets back into their holes. And mobbing is a behavior that I actually explained about in my previous podcast, where a lot of territorial birds such as drongos and mynas will actually really aggressively chase another bird away or fly towards another bird in order to defend the territory. And a lot of times crows and mynas will actually mob spotted owlets from being perched on the branches back into their nesting holes. And spotted owlets are quite common. I've seen a lot of them during the day as well. And what is truly fascinating is scientists actually for a lot of time believe that owls didn't have pineal glands, but the spotted owlet is actually one of the few owls that actually has a pineal gland, and that is why they can actually regulate the circadian rhythm. And I find this to be truly fascinating. And being on the topic of owlets, the next bird that I'm going to talk about is actually a barn owl. And these birds are again one of the most common birds that I've ever seen in Mumbai. I've seen so many of them. I have seen so many of them from my window perched on a tree. Sometimes I've seen one actually swoop down on the road trying to eat a rat. And I have seen a lot of different barn owls, and they're one of the most truly fascinating creatures. And they actually have a really unique face shape, and the reason they have that particular face shape is so that they can actually have really amazing hearing. They have a funnel shaped face so that all the sound waves can directly go into their ear canals, and they have really amazing hearing to the point where they can actually hear their primary prey, which is rats and mice. Even if they're under the leaf litter, they can hear these prey and actually swoop in and catch them. And they have amazing hearing, as I mentioned. And barn owls are actually really ubiquitous in cities. I have seen them in several cities, not just Mumbai, and they're actually found on every single continent in the world except Antarctica. That's how ubiquitous they are. And unlike spotted owlets that actually have a generalist diet, barn owls actually have a really specialist diet where they mainly eat rats and mice. And since they eat rats and mice, they're really effective at rodent control, and they have a really amazing symbiotic relationship with agriculture as well, since their primary food source is actually rats. And a family of barn owls in the wild can actually eat up to 1,000 rodents in one breeding season. That is how many rats they eat. And just like how spotted owlets eat different hard chitinous insects with a lot of hard exoskeletons. They will eat those insects and actually regurgitate the pellets. The same way the barn owls, after they eat the rats and mice which they swallow whole, they swallow their prey whole, they will actually regurgitate compressed pellets of their bones and fur. And that can be really helpful for scientists who want to study particular environments, where if they study the particular pellets that the barn owl has regurgitated, it gives them an idea of the prey source that are prevalent in that particular area. And it is really helpful in studying the wildlife and the fauna as well for scientists through the pellets. And barn owls are actually one of the only bird species that actually practice brood reduction. And what I mean by that is that if they are in a particular habitat or area that has less prey, where the prey is scarce, the stronger chicks actually will outcompete the weaker chicks in order for at least some chicks to survive to adulthood. And I find that to be truly fascinating. And barn owls are one of the most beautiful birds that I've ever seen, and they're one of the most common birds that you can see from your window in Mumbai. And now the next bird that I'm going to be talking about is a really beautiful bird. I have seen this bird a couple of times from my window, perched on a tree or perched on a wire. They're really beautiful, and they're the green bee eaters. Now, green bee eaters are again really common birds. They're found in a lot of different areas, and they're really well adapted to living not in cities but near cities, and in areas that have gardens and a lot of greenery as well within cities. And green bee eaters are one of the most fascinating birds, since I've already explained this on my previous podcast. Their main prey is actually bees, hornets, wasps, and dragonflies, and they will actually catch these insects mid-air. They hunt aerially, where they will actually be perched on a branch. They will spot an insect. They will mid-air catch that insect, come back and sit on that perch, and actually beat the insect on the branch to break its exoskeleton and remove the stinger if it's a bee. And after actually beating the insect on the branch to remove its stinger, they will actually rub the abdomen of the insect on the branch as well, in order to remove any other parts of the stinger that were left and to remove any venom as well. And green bee eaters are truly fascinating birds. And another really fascinating feature about green bee eaters is that they will actually posture themselves sometimes in a way that they spread their wings open to increase the sun exposure, to stimulate the production of a certain oil that they actually then spread through their wings, in order to keep their wings waterproof and to make sure that no parasites can get near their wings. And that is truly fascinating. And green bee eaters actually make their nests inside tunnels on sandbanks, where their tunnels will be 2 to 3 meters long, leading to a tiny chamber where they will actually lay their eggs and the chicks will be born. And green bee eaters are truly fascinating, and they actually do this tunnel nesting due to the reason of thermoregulation. And what I mean by that is, green bee eaters, apart from being well adapted to living in jungles and urban areas, they actually mostly live in arid environments. And this is really important, as when they're tucked in into that tiny chamber there, it's really much cooler than the outside environment, and so that helps in thermoregulation. And another thing green bee eaters actually do to thermoregulate is they actually have dust baths as well, like common house sparrows. And green bee eaters are truly fascinating. And another thing that I find really cool is that yearlings of the previous broods will actually stay with the parents and help and facilitate in taking care of the nest as well as the chicks once they are born, which is truly fascinating. And the next bird that I'm going to be talking about, that I have seen several times in Mumbai, is the Indian Grey Hornbill. And these are one of the most beautiful birds ever, and I've seen them a couple of times from my window, and I can't wait to explain to you guys why I find them fascinating. Now, the way Indian Grey Hornbills actually nest is truly unique and one of a kind, and quite different from most bird species. The female Indian Grey Hornbill will actually get into the cavity of a tree, and the hole that is connecting the inside of the cavity to the outside of the tree, she will actually line it with fruit pulp, feces, and mud that the male Indian Grey Hornbill is collecting from the outside habitats and getting to the hole, which she will then fill from the inside until just a tiny vertical slit is left in the hole, that is leading from the cavity to the outside, where the Indian Grey Hornbill can actually give the food inside. And during the incubation period as well as the brooding period, the male Indian Grey Hornbill is the sole provider of the food. It will actually go fly around in the habitat, and they have a vast a variety of diet. They actually are insectivores, they eat fruits, they eat berries as well, and sometimes they are also known to eat rodents. So what will happen is that the male Indian Grey Hornbill will actually collect food from different parts of the jungle and come back and feed the female Indian Grey Hornbill and the chicks once they are born through that tiny hole. And they do this in order to safeguard the chicks from predators like the monitor lizard, as well as a lot of different arboreal snakes that would probably feed on those hornbill chicks. And what is truly fascinating is once it is time for the chicks to get out of the cavity, once they are developed enough, the female will actually peck on that hardened fruit pulp and mud that she has lined the hole with. She will actually keep pecking on that until that breaks apart, and then they will go out. And what is truly amazing is that the female Indian Grey Hornbill has to time this perfectly, because if she decides to open the hole a little before the chicks have developed, then they will be quite underdeveloped. They will not be able to take their first flight, and they will be quite defenseless to arboreal snakes that might feed on them, or monitor lizards, or any other predators. But if she may wait too long, and does not break the hole fast enough and waits for the chicks to become too large, they might become too large within the hole, and there might not be enough space, and it might not be clean, since they will also be defecating inside that hole, and she will not be able to keep it clean and safe for the chicks. So it has to be timed perfectly, where the Indian Grey Hornbill knows that this is the perfect time where the chicks are perfectly developed, where after she breaks the hole, the male Indian Grey Hornbill and the female Indian Grey Hornbill will actually together collect some food and lure the chicks out of the cavity with the food, and that is actually when they take their first flight. And that is why I find Indian Grey Hornbills to be truly fascinating. And like I mentioned earlier, they actually have a really vast diet. They eat everything from fruits, berries, insects like earthworms, to even rodents like mice and rats sometimes. And what I find really amazing is that they're really important keystone species. By swallowing so many fruits whole, what they actually do is they will defecate the viable seeds, and that is how a lot of different plants like figs actually get planted. And this is truly fascinating, and a lot of seed dispersal happens this way, and they're one of the most fascinating birds ever. These birds are really well adapted to living in areas with greenery near cities, and in other areas like jungles as well. So they're really well adaptable birds. And Indian Grey Hornbills are truly fascinating, and they are completely arboreal, unless it is when the male Indian Grey Hornbill is actually foraging on the floor to collect pieces of mud to actually line the entrance of the hole. That is the only time where they will actually be on the floor, and most of the time they're actually completely arboreal. And now the next bird that I'm going to be talking about, that is actually a really beautiful bird that I have seen a couple of times from my window, the Indian Pitta. Now these birds are one of the most fascinating birds ever, and a lot of the times, even if you may not be able to see them from your window, you may be able to hear them sometimes, especially during their breeding season, since they have a really loud and melodious sound. And Indian pittas are actually crepuscular as well. Most of the times they will be out during the early morning hours and during the late evening hours. And what they do is they are actually terrestrial foragers, just like the myna, where they will actually hop on the forest floor and move the twigs, leaves, and humus for the earthworms and insects to start crawling by, and then they will actually feed on them. And Indian pittas actually breed in the Himalayas and the foothills of the Himalayas, and they're migratory within the Indian subcontinent, where they will actually migrate after their breeding season to southern and central India during winter. And that is truly fascinating, and their breeding time always coincides with the onset of monsoon, since a lot of abundance of prey is there, like insects and earthworms that they eat, and that their chicks will also be fed by them. And now the next bird that I'm going to be talking about is the orange thrush. Now these are one of the most beautiful birds ever. The first time I ever saw this bird was during a bird watching trail in Shillong, and after that I've seen them a couple of times from my window. And what's truly fascinating about these birds is that they have a lot of prevalent sexual dimorphism. And what I mean by that is that the males will actually have a really vibrant orange head, and will have a more blue and grayish body, whereas the females will actually have a more dull color with more olive and brown undertones. And they also will move vast distances that they will travel at night, and they have one of the most loud calls ever. They're terrestrial foragers just like the myna, and they will hop on the forest floor, and they will actually move the twigs, leaves, and humus to eat the insects and earthworms that are crawling below. And in this way they actually really help in aerating the soil, and this really helps in nutrient cycling as well. And since they spend majority of the time in the dense undergrowth of the jungles, a lot of times they have to see in darker environments, in low light environments, and so they have specialized dark eyes that actually can help them see in these low light environments when they can actually forage for their food. And how they help in aerating the soil is a lot of times these orange thrushes, when they're moving their beaks through the soil layers trying to find earthworms, or they're moving the twigs, a lot of times they're actually mixing these soil layers, and by exposing the top layer of the soil to the air, a lot of times they actually can help aerate the soil, and this is truly important in jungles. And when I talk about their calls, the male orange thrushes, although they're mainly terrestrial foragers, they will actually fly high up in the canopy of trees when it's their territory and will actually make really loud sounds to alert other birds that are entering their territory. And these birds are actually known to incorporate the sounds of other bird calls in their calls as well, which is truly fascinating. And the start of their breeding season, again just like the Indian pitta, coincides with the onset of monsoon, so that there can be a lot of abundance of prey like insects like cockroaches, beetles, and ants that they can feed on. And the larger prey items that they actually catch, they then beat them on a surface before feeding on them and before feeding them to their chicks. And now the next bird that I'm going to be talking about is the Peregrine Falcon. I have seen the Peregrine Falcon just once from my window, and I literally love that bird. It's one of the most fascinating birds ever, and they're literally the fastest animal on the planet and can fly up to a speed of 320 kilometers per hour. They hunt birds that are even larger than them, like waterfowl, and they actually hunt these birds aerially, where they will actually spot a bird from really far away. Their eyesight is amazing, and they will fly down, swoop down, and actually catch that prey. And their talons are so sharp that they will actually pierce their prey as soon as they catch them, and that actually stuns and shocks the prey and kills them before they can even feed on them. And these birds are truly fascinating, as they're one of the only bird species that will actually eat some of their prey and then leave the carcass on the crevice or on the nesting site to actually feed on it later as well. And although they're naturally known to make nests on cliffs, they are so well adapted to living in cities all over the world that they actually have sometimes made their nests on skyscrapers, old abandoned buildings, and near other urban infrastructures as well. And peregrine falcons have reverse sexual dimorphism, and what I mean by that is that the female peregrine falcons are actually 30% larger than the male peregrine falcons, and so they can actually eat much larger prey than the male peregrine falcons. And certain subpopulations of peregrine falcons actually travel thousands of kilometers from their breeding grounds to other areas in the world, and they're truly remarkable birds. And now the next bird that I'm going to talk about, that is again a really common bird that I have seen in Mumbai several times, the pied sterling. Now these birds are really fascinating because they have such a vast range of diet. They will actually eat everything from insects to fruits and berries to also consuming nectar, as well as human waste and carrion as well, which is super fascinating. And these birds are really well adapted to living in cities, since a lot of times cities have gardens that are watered a lot of times regularly, keeps the soil wet enough for earthworms and all to be prevalent. And these birds are terrestrial foragers as well, so they can actually feed on these earthworms as well. And a lot of times these birds will actually be sitting on streetlights just like the spotted owlets and be feeding on the insects as well, since they have such a generalist diet. And they're highly effective nest site selectors. They nest in tree hollows, but they're also known to nest in urban infrastructures and areas near human development. And they also have a really sturdy and thick bill for soil probing and also for opening the fallen fruit, which is truly fascinating. And just a couple of days back, I went for a trail where I actually saw a really beautiful pied sterling, and they're one of the most fascinating birds ever. And these birds also can mimic the sounds of other birds as well, which I find truly fascinating. And now the next bird that I'm going to be talking about is the little swift. Now these are again birds that a lot of times I have seen from my window flying high up above in the sky, and these birds are one of the most fascinating birds ever, since they mainly eat the tiny insects that get flown up by the wind. And these tiny insects that they feed on, they actually catch them mid-air, just like how the drongo catches insects. And these birds are literally flying most of the time. Very rarely will they be perched on a tree or will they be hopping on the forest floor. They're mostly flying all of the time high up above in the sky, and they're one of the most beautiful birds ever. They're one of the most well-adapted birds to living in cities and other urban areas, and they actually make their nests by, unlike other birds that tie their nest together by spider silk or by other twigs and other materials like fine grass. These birds will actually make their nest material stick together by the saliva glue. They literally have like a saliva glue which makes them stick together, and these nests are quite durable even in the heat and even in the swaying wind. Since they're hardened up by the saliva glue, they actually sometimes stay intact and the bird chicks can be safe inside. Just like mynas, they do a lot of allopreening as well, where the pairs will actually mutually clean each other's feathers and preen each other in order to keep themselves clean. And these birds literally travel such vast distances to forage. And I've already spoken about 9 birds in today's podcast episode, but I'm going to be talking about a couple more birds as well, starting with the Indian silverbill. And what is truly fascinating is that these birds actually don't build their own nests. And what they will do is they will actually steal the nest of buyer weavers once they have abandoned the nest, or sometimes even while the buyer weaver birds are constructing the nest, they will enter the nest and steal away the nest materials that they are going to be making the nest with. And I find that to be truly fascinating. And sometimes when they have not stolen a buyer weaver bird's nest, they will actually make their nest under the thick twig branch nests of vultures and eagles, which is truly fascinating. That literally the nest of a vulture or eagle, the twigs under it, that's the area right below it where they will make their nest. And I find them to be truly fascinating birds. And they also have a really unique way of drinking water, where unlike other birds that will actually approach the water, put a little of the water into their beak and drink it, they actually fly towards the water really quickly, swallow it, and then fly right back. And they're truly fascinating because they again have a really varied diet. They eat everything from seeds to fruits and insects, even consuming nectar from flowers. And they are terrestrial foragers as well as they hunt their prey aerially. And what I mean by that is that they will actually hop on the forest floor and move the leaves and twigs, like I mentioned before, like the other birds that are terrestrial foragers, and they will eat the earthworms and insects that are crawling on the floor below. But they will also catch insects like flies that are actually flying above them, and they will actually catch them mid-air, which is truly fascinating. And these birds are really social birds. They move in flocks of up to 20 to 60 birds at a time, and they're one of the most beautiful birds ever. And I've seen them only a couple of times from my window, but they're one of the most beautiful birds that I've ever seen. And now the next bird that I'm going to be talking about, which is another really beautiful bird that I've seen a lot of times during trails, and I've seen them a couple of times from my window, are the Asian paradise flycatchers. They're one of the most beautiful birds that I've ever seen, and I've seen them a couple of times from my window. And I have seen the white moth as well as the brown moth as well. They're really beautiful birds, and they're mainly insectivorous birds. They mostly eat insects like dragonflies, smaller flies, moths, butterflies, and other insects. And they inhabit a variety of different habitats such as jungles, mountains, and even urban areas. And now the last bird that I'm going to be talking about in today's podcast, that is again a really common bird that I have seen a couple of times from my window, the rufous-backed shrike. Now these birds are truly fascinating in the way that they hunt their prey, and they eat frogs, reptiles like lizards, and sometimes even tiny snakes. And although they have really sharp beaks to catch their prey, they don't have really strong and sharp talons in order to hold their prey. And so what they do is that they will actually hunt their prey, and then they find a spike on a tree or a thorn, and they will actually impale their prey on that thorn, and they will actually tear apart the meat of that prey, and they actually start eating the head first, and then they start eating the other organs of the prey. And while these birds are mostly carnivorous, they also sometimes eat fruits. And what's fascinating is the way that they even eat these fruits. They actually hunt these fruits, and what I mean by that is the same way that they would hunt the prey, they actually eat these fruits and put it on the same thorns and actually tear it apart while it's on that thorn. And I find that to be truly fascinating. And these birds are amazing vocal mimics. They can actually mimic the bird calls of other bird species really well. It's literally such a beautiful bird. And anyway, I think that's it for my podcast episode. I really hope you guys liked it. And if you guys like watching my podcast episode today, then hit the like button below. Comment down below what podcast episodes you guys want me to make and what topics you guys want me to talk about in the future. And subscribe to my channel if you want to watch a new podcast episode every Wednesday. I know I got a little few days late this time. Instead of Wednesday, I'm uploading on a Monday. But I took a little time to edit the video, and now that the podcast is out, I really hope you guys like it. And I'll see you guys on the next podcast. Stay safe and keep loving nature.